Hello and welcome to LeanReads, the channel that turns powerful books into simple lessons for growth and inspiration. In a world filled with difficult choices, from personal dilemmas to global crisis, how do we decide what's right? John Stuart Mill believed the answer was simple, yet profound. Choose the action that maximizes happiness for the greatest number. Join me as we uncover the powerful ideas behind utilitarianism, ideas that continue to shape our modern sense of justice. If you'd like to read the full book, the link is waiting for you in the description. Now, let's jump into it. Utilitarianism 1861 introduces a moral theory that holds the most ethical action to be the one that maximizes happiness and overall well-being for everyone affected. The work not only explores the consequences of this principle and defends it against potential objections, but also considers its application across many aspects of life. John Stuart Mill, 1806 to 1873, was an English philosopher, economist, and public intellectual. His ideas and writings left a lasting mark on modern political and social thought. Mill's works span a wide range of disciplines, from logic and epistemology to economics and moral philosophy. Some of his most influential works include A System of Logic, 1843, Principles of Political Economy, 1848, and On Liberty, 1859. Imagine you are standing by a railway track, witnessing a terrifying scene. A runaway trolley is speeding toward a group of people standing on the track. In that breathless moment, you notice a lever nearby. If you pull it, the trolley will switch to another track, sparing the group of people, but on that track stands a single person. Time seems to freeze. A life and death decision rests in your hands. Would you sacrifice one life to save many others? Or would you remain still, letting fate take its course? This is the famous trolley problem, one of countless dilemmas used to illustrate John Stuart Mill's profound philosophy of utilitarianism. This book takes us deep into Mill's intellectual world, exploring how his ideas have shaped our understanding of morality and analyzing the implications of applying utilitarian thinking to real-life situations. Mill was more than just a theorist. He was a philosopher, economist, and political thinker whose influence has reverberated throughout the history of human thought. Born into an intellectual family in 1806, John Stuart Mill displayed remarkable brilliance at an early age. By the time he was 12, he could read Greek and Latin and was already immersed in the works of Plato and Aristotle. His father, James Mill, was a stern man who placed great importance on the power of education to shape a child's character. As a result, he subjected young John to a strict and rigorous program of study. Yet, as he matured, Mill began to question his father's conservative views and the prevailing attitudes of his time. He emerged as a staunch advocate of individual liberty, women's rights, and social reform, using his pen and voice to campaign for change. In 1843, Mill published A System of Logic, laying the groundwork for modern scientific reasoning. However, it was his essays on utilitarianism that became his most enduring philosophical legacy. Building on the work of his mentor, Jeremy Bentham, Mill developed a comprehensive moral theory based on the principle of utility. This principle asserts that the rightness of an action is judged by its consequences, and the best action is the one that maximizes happiness and overall welfare. At the heart of Mill's philosophy lies the conviction that happiness is the ultimate aim of human life, and that we should strive to create a society in which everyone can flourish. He argued that each individual has an equal right to pursue happiness, and that governments have a duty to promote the welfare of citizens through policies that encourage education, social progress, and economic opportunity. Mill was not an idealist detached from reality. He was a rigorous thinker who tested his ideas against logic and evidence. Indeed, his reasoning anticipated many potential criticisms. For example, He argued that the principle of utility is not a justification for hedonism or indulgence, but rather a call to consider the happiness of all people, including future generations. Mill also recognized that not all pleasures are equal, and that certain forms of happiness hold greater value than others. Intellectual pleasures, such as the joy of learning, the satisfaction of creativity, and the sense of achievement in completing meaningful work, ultimately provide deeper fulfillment than mere physical gratification. He emphasized that a truly moral society must allow all individuals to pursue these higher pleasures, regardless of social class or background. At the core of Mill's philosophy lies a simple yet profound idea. The rightness of an action depends on the degree of happiness it produces. This is the essence of the principle of pleasure, the hedonic principle, a notion Mill examined in depth. For him, pleasure and pain are the ultimate measures of good and evil. Mill argues that human nature is oriented toward seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, and that this basic drive can serve as a reliable compass for moral decision-making. When choosing between two courses of action, we should select the one that brings the greatest happiness to all who are affected. But what does Mill mean by happiness? For him, happiness is not a momentary feeling of satisfaction or contentment. It is a deep and durable state that comes from living a purposeful and meaningful life. Of course, each person's sense of happiness varies with circumstances and personal values. Even so, Mill believes there are universal elements of human flourishing that can be assessed and compared in an objective way. One such element is the difference in value among kinds of pleasure. Mill distinguishes between lower pleasures, such as bodily delights or instant gratifications, and higher pleasures, such as intellectual activity, the appreciation of art, and the satisfaction of doing good for others. He contends that higher pleasures are intrinsically more valuable and yield more lasting happiness. This idea is crucial for how we think about ethics and choice. It shows that we should not merely seek to maximize the quantity of pleasure in the world, but also promote the right kinds of pleasure, those rooted in a virtuous, creative life that is connected to society. Measuring happiness is not easy, and Mill acknowledges that a degree of subjectivity always remains. Nevertheless, he argues that we can still make meaningful comparisons among different options by considering their likely consequences and weighing them against our best understanding of what constitutes a good life. For example, suppose you must choose between two job offers. One pays more but demands long hours and brings heavy pressure, while the other pays less but gives you more free time and greater opportunities for personal growth. Mill would suggest that the second option is more likely to produce greater overall happiness, even if it does not deliver immediate financial gains. Mill's utilitarian philosophy challenges traditional conceptions of morality, which often rest on rigid rules established by religion, custom, or tradition. Rather than obeying fixed rules, he argues, moral decision-making should be guided toward the ultimate goal of happiness and flourishing for both individuals and the community. According to Mill, any moral principle that conflicts with the utilitarian aim, maximizing happiness for the many, is fundamentally flawed. Consider the view that some people are born entitled to more happiness than others. In societies that exalt aristocratic privilege, the wealthy and powerful are thought to have a God-given right to rule. In a modern democratic society, utilitarianism regards such a view as not only irrational, but also profoundly unjust. Utilitarianism also rejects the notion that fear should be the main driver of moral conduct. Mill observes that many moral systems rely too heavily on threats of punishment, whether fear of judgment in the afterlife or condemnation by society to force compliance with rules. A morality rooted in fear is inherently unstable and untrustworthy because it motivates good behavior only when people feel watched or judged. Worse still, it can shrink our moral vision, making us focus on avoiding punishment rather than actively promoting the happiness of others. Consider Stoicism or asceticism, which treat the acceptance of suffering as a noble virtue and regard it as morally superior to the pursuit of happiness. On this view, the more one embraces deprivation and hardship, the more one proves moral worth and strength of character. Mill contends that this way of thinking is deeply mistaken and ultimately self-destructive. Utilitarianism does not treat self-denial as a virtue unless it leads to good outcomes. If renouncing enjoyment and accepting pain does not actually produce greater happiness or better health for oneself or others, what purpose does it serve? From a utilitarian standpoint, the strongest criticism of asceticism is that it can generate more suffering and unhappiness over time. By rejecting sources of joy and fulfillment, people may drive themselves into despair and apathy. Worse, valorizing hardship can prevent them from seeking the help and resources needed for a healthier, happier life. By contrast, a pragmatic ethical approach like utilitarianism aims to nurture a genuine concern for the happiness and flourishing of everyone, regardless of status or class. It encourages us to consider the consequences of our actions, not only for ourselves, but for all who are affected, and to decide on the basis of a careful weighing of benefits and costs. If religion, tradition, and custom are no longer firm foundations for moral decision-making in modern society, what becomes of the legal system one that for centuries has relied on religious or customary punishments to enforce what was called the common good? This is an open question raised by utilitarianism, one that challenges us to think about how to construct a system of justice that is both fairer and more effective in the contemporary age. In utilitarian philosophy, the foundation of a just and moral society rests upon a key principle: proportionality. This principle holds that the severity of punishment or consequence should correspond to the degree of harm caused by the offense. A person who steals a loaf of bread out of hunger cannot be punished on the same level as a murderer or someone who inflicts serious injury. While this may sound obvious, applying the principle of proportionality in practice is far from simple. In reality, translating proportionality into legal practice is a complex and demanding process. Determining the appropriate punishment for an offense requires careful consideration of many factors, from the specific circumstances of the case to the broader social and cultural context. Utilitarianism contributes a vital perspective to modern debates about justice. The consequences of an action are the true measure of its moral worth. In other words, when deciding how to address a violation, we should not rely solely on abstract notions of right and wrong. Rather, we must focus on the actual impact that our decision will have on the happiness and well-being of those involved. Consider the case of a serious crime, such as assault or robbery. The instinctive response is often to impose harsh and severe penalties, such as lengthy prison terms or even the death penalty. Yet a utilitarian perspective urges us to look beyond this immediate reaction and evaluate the broader consequences. Does harsh punishment truly deter others, or does it generate further instability and resentment within society? Does it provide an opportunity for the offender to reform and reintegrate into the community, or does it only isolate them further? These are precisely the kinds of questions that a utilitarian approach to justice compels us to weigh. Such an approach has profoundly influenced contemporary thought, from how we prosecute crimes to how we design social programs and public policy. Morality is not confined to the boundaries of law or social justice. Any ethical system must take into account the lived reality of individuals who face countless complex decisions every day. For utilitarianism to be truly useful, it must be applied to the practical circumstances of life. To illustrate this more clearly, let us consider a concrete example. Suppose you are a doctor working in an overcrowded hospital during a pandemic. The hospital faces a severe shortage of ventilators, and you are forced to make an excruciating choice. Two patients are in critical condition, and both require a ventilator to survive. One is a young mother with two small children. The other is an elderly man with a complicated medical history. With only one ventilator available, whom do you save? This was the heartbreaking dilemma many doctors confronted during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Utilitarianism offers a framework for guiding decisions in such impossible situations. At its heart, utilitarian thinking seeks to maximize happiness and overall well-being for all those involved. In this example, saving the young mother ensures that her children will not lose their parent and allows her the chance to live a fuller life. One might argue that her survival would bring greater long-term benefits, given her vital role in raising her children and the many years of life that still lie ahead. However, the elderly man also has the right to live and to receive adequate medical care. His experience, wisdom, and contributions to his family and community carry undeniable value. Choosing to save the younger woman could be seen as a form of discrimination, prioritizing one life over another based on age and perceived social utility. Ultimately, there may be no entirely correct answer in such a dilemma. Yet by approaching the issue through a utilitarian lens carefully, weighing all potential consequences, and striving to maximize overall welfare, we can ensure that our decision is grounded in a thoughtful moral framework. This same framework can also be extended to address pressing global challenges, such as the urgent need for climate action. In this way, utilitarianism broadens the scope of maximizing happiness beyond humanity alone, recognizing that animals, plants, and entire ecosystems also deserve access to the resources they need to survive and thrive. Human beings face countless difficult choices in this complex world, from personal decisions about how to spend one's time and resources to professional and political choices that carry wide-reaching consequences for society. Utilitarian reasoning provides a valuable tool for stripping away the irrelevant and focusing on what truly matters. However, it does not guarantee an absolute moral action. Even decisions made with the best intentions may result in unforeseen consequences. Therefore, it is essential to approach utilitarian thinking with humility and openness, acknowledging that our understanding of the world is always incomplete and that any ethical system must remain flexible, ready to adapt and evolve as new information and perspectives emerge. John Stuart Mill's philosophy was groundbreaking for its time. He argued that the morality of an action is determined by its consequences. Within this system, the most ethical choices are those that bring about the greatest happiness for the greatest number. By carefully considering the outcomes of our decisions and striving to maximize collective well-being, we can approach moral dilemmas with greater thoughtfulness and principle. Yet utilitarianism is not a perfect solution. It must be applied with humility and flexibility, acknowledging that our understanding of the world is always evolving and that unforeseen consequences are inevitable. Reading Utilitarianism by John Stuart Mill is both an intellectual challenge and an invitation to reflect on what it truly means to live an ethical life. What struck me most is Mill's insistence that morality is not about rigid rules or abstract ideals, but about consequences, the tangible impact our choices have on the happiness and well-being of others. His philosophy feels refreshingly practical, yet profoundly human. It acknowledges that life is filled with dilemmas where no answer seems entirely right, and it urges us to choose the path that nurtures the most good, even when that requires sacrifice or difficult trade-offs. I found Mill's distinction between higher and lower pleasures especially powerful. It reminds us that true fulfillment comes not merely from fleeting enjoyment, but from intellectual growth, creativity, compassion, and contributing to something larger than ourselves. At the same time, Mill is realistic. Utilitarianism is not a flawless guide. Life is unpredictable, consequences are uncertain, and sometimes even well-intentioned choices can lead to harm. What he offers is not perfection, but a compass one that points us toward humility, responsibility, and an honest consideration of how our actions ripple through the lives of others. For me, The lasting value of this book is its call to balance reason with empathy. It challenges us to ask not only, is this right? But also, who will be affected and how? In a world still wrestling with inequality, climate change, and moral uncertainty, Mill's vision remains as urgent and inspiring as ever. Whether you agree with Mill or not, one thing is certain. His philosophy forces us to confront the real impact of our choices. And maybe that's the essence of ethics, not perfection, but responsibility. So, what do you think? Is happiness the ultimate measure of right and wrong?